All right, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here today. I'm Kira Sparks, and I'm the Director of Content with Terminal. We are thrilled to welcome you to today's webinar, Mastering Remote Onboarding. There's really been a groundswell of interest in this topic, and it's become clear that a lot of people are struggling with onboarding right now. And so I really just wanted to start by applauding you guys for taking the time to really up-level your organizational thinking around this. I'm joined today by my colleague, Carrie McKinney, who I'll introduce further in just a moment, but I wanted to run through a few quick housekeeping items before we get underway. So we want to make this a really interactive experience for you all. So there'll be moments over the course of the webinar where we'll ask you poll questions. A pop-up will appear on your screen, and we just encourage you all to participate at that time. We'll also have plenty of time at the end of the webinar for questions. If you want to type any of your questions in as they pop into your mind throughout the webinar, you can use the Q&A chat box to do that. And we'll get to as many as we can. So before I get into the agenda, we wanted to kick things off with a poll question. So that's going to pop up in just a second. And we want to understand just a little bit more about some of the challenges you guys are having with remote onboarding. So what are the biggest challenges you have seen with remote onboarding? No standardized process. We're always reinventing the wheel. New hires only get exposed to their own team, not others. Differing time zones are creating scheduling conflicts. Lack of face-to-face means loss of bonding and connection. There are probably some other ones as well. So we'll give you about 15-20 seconds to select yours, and then we'll look at the answers. All right, just a few more seconds. Get your answer in there. Okay, interesting. It looks like definitely about 38% has seen the no standardized process issue. 48% of people said new hires are only getting exposed to their own team. Only 10% of you said differing time zones are creating a challenge. And then the majority said a lack of face-to-face means loss of bonding. Yep, that's definitely something we're hearing a lot. We'll touch on in today's webinar, but we're also in the process of creating more education on how to build culture and connection among remote teams. So excited to share that with you guys as well. All right, so let's move into the agenda. Today we're going to start with a quick overview of Terminal, just to give you guys an idea of who we are, what we do, and why we're talking about remote onboarding today. And then looking quickly at the remote work landscape and some of the challenges that we're all facing as we've quickly pivoted into this new world. Then we'll jump into the meat of the presentation, why remote onboarding matters, some pre-boarding, kind of pre-onboarding checklists that you can look at as you build your program, and then some how-tos of how to build a really high impact program. So just a few introductions before we get going. Carrie McKinney is joining me today. Carrie is currently our Global Director of Talent Acquisition for Terminal and has over a decade of experience recruiting for high growth startups across North and South America, EMEA, and APAC. Prior to joining us at Terminal, Carrie worked for companies like Amazon, InVision, and Indeed, where she was responsible for building out their internal executive search function and helping the company grow from 4,000 to 8,000 employees in less than 2 years, which is no small feat. Welcome, Carrie, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kira. Super excited to be here and to dig into the topic of onboarding remotely.
Awesome. Well, more from Carrie soon. I'll give a brief intro of myself as well. So I'm the Director of Content here, and my role is to really understand the pain points our customers are going through and provide comprehensive education and resources like this webinar today to help them overcome challenges and succeed professionally and help their companies grow. I've spent over a decade in the content field building programs out at Indiegogo, Vungle, Shoutlit, and others. And I'm so excited to be working with Terminal and in this remote space today to really help provide and shine a light on some of the topics in remote work. All right, so a quick introduction of Terminal. We enable growing companies to attract and retain global talent. So what we like to call ourselves is a remote teams engine. We help with the recruiting piece, but also go beyond that to provide benefits needed to retain your teams for the long run. So I want to tell you just a little bit about our story and how our journey began. So we, in 2016, came to life as part of the startup studio and venture capital fund Atomic. They were actually pursuing an initiative to build 5 companies at the same time. But, which might, in something that might sound familiar to you guys, they needed to quickly recruit engineers in order to validate the product market fit for these companies and get off the ground. They were coming up against expensive talent market in San Francisco, and that was slowing down their progress. So that's where our co-founders came in and helped launch an initial team of 5 engineers in Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario, which is just an incredible tech hub that's somewhat lesser known, but housing a lot of really great engineering talent. So this initial team of 5 quickly grew into a community of more than 40 engineers, and all 5 of those startups received further funding. So fast forward to today, Terminal has campuses in 5 vibrant tech hubs: Vancouver, Kitchener, Toronto, Montreal, and Guadalajara. We built over 30 remote teams, hired hundreds of engineers, hired and onboarded hundreds of engineers. And all this is kind of supported by our unique model, blending recruiting, HR, ops, and community to drive growth. So I wanted to share just the kind of Terminal product ecosystem with you before we get into the presentation today. There are 3 parts that sort of make up this remote teams engine. One is the talent platform, which is offering our customers recruiting anywhere in North America, led by Carrie and her amazing team of recruiters. And then we also we go beyond recruiting to offer a remote management platform, which you can think about as like a PEO on steroids, payroll and HR and benefits management, and then going beyond that to really offer remote benefits like assistance setting up your remote workspace and educational programs for our engineering members to really help boost retention and get them to stick around with our customers for the long run. And then lastly, we also have flexible workspace. So as I mentioned, we have 5 tech hubs, and those are co-located spaces in Canada and Mexico where our engineers can kind of come together and work in collaboration. Of course, we're looking forward for the day when those can reopen again. All right, so that's enough about Terminal for now. I want to talk a little bit about the remote work landscape and where we're all today, just to sort of ground us in that before we move into onboarding. So overnight, all of us were thrust into this world of remote work. For some companies who already had remote teams or remote members, might have felt like a little less of a transition. Other companies, it was upheaval and everyone really, needed to quickly find new infrastructure and process to adapt. Either way, whichever one resonates with you, we now know that remote is likely here to stay for the foreseeable future. Even when we're able to go back into our offices one day, it may look a little different than it does now. We just had some data here from Gallup, which I found interesting. About 94% of startups plan to adopt or expand their remote strategy, which makes sense. That's the world we're currently living in. But only about 20% actually feel ready to do that and feel ready to execute on a remote strategy. So that's a lot of what we're trying to share with you guys today and in the future is ways to develop that remote strategy and feel more confident that you're ready to kind of take on the future of remote work, no matter what that looks like. All right, so just looking at a few of the challenges here of going remote, these should all feel pretty familiar at this point. Building a retaining culture in a remote workforce, that is, definitely what you guys were getting at with the poll. How do we connect people when they're so, isolated and physically distanced? How do we bring our teams together? Adapting interviewing process. So this is something we talk about a lot too. How do you do remote interviewing right in a really seamless way and make sure that you're not turning great talent away? And then, of course, remote team management. There's so many pieces of that, down to how do you have remote meetings, to how do you communicate with teams, that, really are important to long run retention and loyalty. So that's something we also spend a lot of time thinking and educating about. And then lastly, why we're all here today, creating and implementing a impactful remote onboarding process. Onboarding is so important, as you all know, because you're here today, and it can be hard to do right remotely. So your new hires' first weeks are arguably their most important. Again, I think because you're all here today, you probably agree with that statement. Effective onboarding can, by some accounts, improve retention by 82% and boost employee productivity by over 70% in the long term. So this is just one data point, but there's a lot of research that shows the onboarding is critical to the kind of future health and happiness of that employee on your team. And then as well, I think that, impactful onboarding and getting people up to speed quickly can really help them also start to contribute more quickly. And that can play a big impact on moving fast and building, especially from the engineering and product side. So investing in onboarding is definitely investing in your overall team, and that's something we firmly believe. So I am now going to kick it over to Carrie to dive into the topic today a little deeper.
Awesome. Thank you, Kira. Well, I am excited to talk about this topic. I've always been super interested in onboarding, but when you throw the remote aspect in, it adds a whole different layer. So we have a lot of really great content to share with you all. After the webinar, we'll also be sharing the onboarding guidebook that we have, along with some additional supplemental templates and things like that. So before we get started, I wanted to do one quick poll again to kind of just get a sense of how many people here currently have a standardized onboarding process versus maybe you just kind of do it on your own as it comes up. So let me, okay. We'll give you about 30 seconds, probably not 30 seconds. This is a much quicker one to answer. All right, so it looks like 84% of people here have a standardized onboarding program, which is great. Obviously, some of the things we share you may already know of. What we hope is that everyone walks away with at least one takeaway that they can help implement in their day-to-day. All right, so let's jump in to standardizing the onboarding process. As Kira mentioned before, one of the biggest onboarding challenges that I think companies do experience is what is the standard onboarding experience that their employees have. And when you throw in the remote aspect of where they're located, it can make it a lot more challenging. So the first thing that we really look at is, how do you define your onboarding purpose? What do you want the employee to walk away from, not only from a knowledge standpoint, but also from, an emotional standpoint? Do you want them to walk away feeling excited? Do you want them to walk away feeling energized about their new job? So really, when you think about the content, it's important to think about how you want the employee to feel after they complete the entire week. And then outline an onboarding curriculum and checklist. This is incredibly important. Making sure you have easily accessible links to all the resources. I cannot stress this enough. And I remember one specific job where I started going through this checklist that I had, and it felt like every other link was access denied, must request access. So I spent probably half of my day having to chase down people and saying, who do I ask to get access to this? So make sure that that stuff is really looked at before you share the document with the new hires. And then maintain a flexible and relevant employee handbook. This should be a broad overview of things like the company mission, the team function, and future long-term plans. This will obviously be changed, but you really want to make this something that you don't have to spend a lot of time on because it will be more information intense. And then ensure all parts of the onboarding experience that touch multiple people are scheduled together if possible. This obviously gets a little bit harder if your company is smaller, but making sure that you group people together will not only give them a chance to mingle with other new people, but it helps them feel less isolated. When it comes to an IT, have your IT support person meet with everyone to show the main systems together and do high-level troubleshooting. When it comes to benefits, if you have people who are in multiple countries, consider having everyone get together and do the company benefits first and then break out into smaller groups to do a quick overview of the different countries. This will still keep people kind of feeling that group atmosphere and then just taking smaller breaks throughout the day. And then schedule meet and greets with relevant colleagues before the employee starts. I'm sure all of our calendars, some more than others, are pretty crazy. And a lot of times if these if you wait until the week the new hire starts, these can get pushed out or rescheduled, and sometimes it will never end up happening. So make sure you get those on the calendar before, and I always recommend including basic information in the invite about the candidate's role as well as the existing employee's role to help both parties get up to speed a little bit faster and kind of help them start the conversation. And then if you have employees starting in multiple time zones, make sure the start time is convenient for all. We'll talk a little bit more about this down the road, but you want to make sure that, if they're in Pacific, Central, Eastern, at least for the first week, everybody who's starting is starting together. At Terminal, we do 10:30 a.m. Eastern, kind of in the middle for Pacific, Central, and Mountain and Eastern. And then one thing I did want to mention that's not on this slide, but I do think is really important is combine classroom time with small group discussions. So start everyone out in the meeting and then break people up into little groups and give them questions to answer when they are with people. Have them come back and share things that they've learned. It's very, very beneficial if you have enough employees in the onboarding to kind of do the small groups and then big group and then small group.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Carrie. I think creating opportunities for people to have a voice in the process is great, and it can be easier when that's a small group discussion versus a really big group of people.
Yeah.
One question I had for you, connecting new hires throughout this process and encouraging collaboration is so important, as you touched on. Do you have any, examples or tactics you've used in the past to do that effectively?
So I'm not taking credit for this, but when I was at Envision has a very, very good onboarding plan. And something that they do that I thought was very, very beneficial is they break everyone into small groups and then they have them use the internal tools to design an app together. So it was a really, really fun opportunity for new hires to not only get to learn about each other, but they also got to experience the internal products and learn more about how they work together. Now, obviously, not every company will have a product that employees can use, but it's super beneficial to just figure out something that your team can work on together that's related to either your mission or whatever product you have. And really, help build that collaboration from the beginning.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of also it's a nice way for people to work together in a way that's not just like all right, go to lunch and have a conversation, but you're solving a problem together, and people want
Exactly.
different skill sets to do that.
Yeah. And especially if you give them something to talk about, it makes the conversation flow rather than kind of like you said, like send them to a small group, but don't tell you what to talk about. It usually will be a lot of awkward silence.
Yeah.
All right. So pre-boarding. Onboarding can be very stressful, especially if you have a lot of people starting at once. So it's incredibly important that your pre-boarding is dialed in and set up just as structured as the actual onboarding process. Multiple things go into pre-boarding. Some of them may be relatable, some of them not. If you have contracts to send, if you send them in the mail, definitely send plenty of time, or can make sure you have plenty of time when you send them. We highly recommend looking into online contract software like DocuSign and HelloSign to cut out time for this. Physical equipment. So providing new hires, and I know this isn't available for every company, but if you can provide new hires with a list of hardware to choose from based on their personal preference, it's a great way to show new hires that you care about their needs and genuinely want them to be comfortable. Make sure they have their equipment well before their start date, and ensure that your IT team has all of the necessary programs installed on it, again, if possible. If not, it's super beneficial to make sure to include even just a quick document with tips and logins, so that the person doesn't feel so lost when they get their brand new computer. And then software access, similar to the equipment, make sure, again, that people have access to everything. You don't want them, like I did, having to click multiple things and not have to get in. And then team contact. So encourage your team members to connect with a new employee before their start date. This is great to do on LinkedIn, to just shoot them a quick, can't wait to work with you. If you have people you know they're going to work with a lot more, consider having your internal employees send a quick welcome email. Obviously, you don't want to have too many people do that, but it can be beneficial to start building that rapport before they even start. And then internal materials and swag. First of all, I love swag, and I think that swag is a great way to get people really excited about your company. If budget is an issue, even a handwritten note can go a super long way in welcoming the person to the team. And then when it comes to internal materials, it's always helpful to send people over just even website info, public information that they can learn about your company. Obviously, it's not required, but a lot of people do appreciate kind of getting up to speed quicker before they start working in onboarding. So after you have your pre-boarding set up, you want to make sure that you outline your onboarding curriculum. One of the poll options earlier that it looked like a lot of people said was an issue was the number or the exposure to other departments in the onboarding process. So something that we like to recommend is making sure that each department has some sort of involvement in the onboarding plan. It's very beneficial to have them attend as a guest. This not only has the new hires get to meet new employees, but it's very beneficial for them to hear firsthand from the department head. So when it comes to your company overview, obviously showing your history, mission, values, all the fun stuff. If you can have your CEO present this, it's incredibly impactful, and new hires always seem to really enjoy hearing directly from the CEO's words. When it comes to your business development team, think about how does your team sell your company or product to outsiders, and showcase that to the new hires. This is especially beneficial for new hires who are in a role such as recruiting or hiring, as it gives them a chance to think about how will they pitch their company to potential candidates. That is similar in the way that your business development team does to potential clients. Marketing, This is a great place to have the team share social media handles and encourage your employees to use, to follow your platform if they use those platforms. When it comes to expansion, this is obviously probably going to be a lot different for companies moving forward, especially if you throw in the real estate aspect. But give just a brief overview of your growth plans and your potential new markets that you're looking to go into to get them excited about the company growth. People in HR, this obviously has a huge impact in the onboarding process, but it's very important to also make sure during this time that you share relevant contact information for any topic that may come up for the new hire. Something that we hear a lot about is new hires don't know who to ask for what questions. If they have a benefits or comp question, the first place they usually will do is HR at, but there's a lot of different people that they probably need to have a solid understanding of the different topics to go to. So it's always beneficial to highlight that for your people team. And then talent acquisition, near and dear to my heart. I think it's very important to include this part in your onboarding curriculum to make sure that your team knows exactly how you hire, what you look for when you're hiring, and just the process that your company follows. We all know that recruiting is different at every company, so conveying your recruiting process up front will be incredibly helpful, especially for those who are going to be hiring. And then finally, finance. Depending on what your company is, this may or may not be super an extensive part, but it's always helpful to introduce your new hires to operations and just your overall strategy of the company.
Yeah, so one that's great, Carrie. And one thing I wanted to ask as a follow-up, curriculum can be definitely one of the hardest pieces to put together because you're sort of asking other people to contribute, and there's a lot of upfront time commitment there. What do you think is some of the best ways for an HR team to really align the team leads with the importance, why onboarding is important, and then actually get the content from them to create?
That's a really good question, and probably a very challenging one that comes up a lot. I'd say the first thing that I think is really important is showing them the why you're asking them to be involved in the first place. A lot of times it can feel like different functions at a company are very siloed and they kind of get into their own world and they don't realize how their department impacts all the other departments. So I think first is making sure to highlight why you want them involved, why you are approaching them, and how what they do impacts every employee, regardless of what job they're hired for. The second part of your question is a little bit trickier, and this is something that I have found that has been very helpful for me when it comes to putting together presentations and needing input. I provide the lead with like a general outline of what I'm looking for. And I ask them to fill in, add bullets on the topics. And really, if I ask them to fill out just an outline and give them something basic to start with, I find this goes a lot farther than just saying, hey, I need you to put together 5 slides on a deck for me, and I needed you to give it to me in 2 weeks. Most of the time you're going to want your presentation to be consistent and in the same format as the rest. So if you can get into the habit of just collecting the actual content, it can make them feel like you're taking a lot off of their plate.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it, like you said, it would go a long way towards consistency as well, because if you let people, loose with free reins, you're probably going to get a lot of different types of materials back, and then it's more work on the HR team to make those consistent. So I think the kind of worksheet or template deck approach is a really good one.
Yes, exactly. That's a great question. All right, so key roles and ownership. As we mentioned, onboarding is a big part of the people HR team, but it is a shared responsibility, and it's really important that each person involved in the onboarding process sees that. You want to make sure that, kind of like interviewer focus areas, each person that is involved should have their own focus area. What are they focusing on when they meet with the new hires? Whether it's in a large group or a small group, each person should make sure they know exactly what they're going to be focusing on and what part of the curriculum to cover. This also will make sure that information doesn't go miss and that the information shared is accurate. Having a member of HR present an overview on finance or marketing probably won't go as far as it would if I had Kira come and talk about marketing at Terminal rather than me trying to do it. So make sure as you're developing your outline that you have this strictly laid out so there's no questions for anyone involved. All right, so a few other things we wanted to jump into, company norms, expectations, and just being transparent around the whole process. Onboarding milestones is a great way to keep your new hires engaged and make sure they're moving in the right direction before they get thrown into their official, non-ramp period. So make sure that whatever needs to be done, you set those milestones, whether it's their first week, their first month. There's certain people they need to be meeting, within their first few weeks. Make sure that all of those milestones are set. And then work hours. Remote work is definitely making people rethink what, standard work hours are. But if you have, expected work hours, make sure you're clearly outlining those up front. And then make sure that you're sharing the best place to communicate different questions or announcements. This is something that I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of. When I actually started at Terminal, I remember I started sending emails to my team and I was like getting no responses. And I pinged my colleague and I said, do people just not check their email here or something? Like nobody's responding. And I found out that people communicate on Slack here. Like you do very, very not much at all in your email. So make sure you communicate to the new hires the best places to communicate, certain type of things. And then business goals. Most employees want to see, why they were hired, what they were hired to do matters within the organization. So make sure you share your KPIs up front, share them with the employee and show them exactly how to get to these goals. I think it's important too that if they are hired into a role that has a ramp up period, such as sales or recruiting, make sure to communicate that to them up front and let them know, if you're getting to this date and you don't feel like you're going to meet the mark, reach out. I think it's important to have that transparency up front to really make sure that the employee leaves onboarding knowing exactly what is expected of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was going to add on to your story about email. I had a similar experience in that at my former company, we were Google Meet users. Terminal tends to be a Zoom company, but when I first began, I kept jumping on all the Meet links in the calendar and just like, where is everybody?
No one's there.
So luckily during the onboarding experience, I can't remember, somebody mentioned, oh, we tend to use Zoom, not Google Hangout. But those little things definitely go a long way to make it an easy transition for people.
Yep, 100%.
One area I wanted to dig in just a little bit more is on that time zone alignment. This is something Terminals thought a lot about because we did a survey last year and about 88% of engineers told us that time zone alignment is really critical to them in terms of like workplace happiness and being productive at work. The Terminal community is spread out, in Canada and Mexico and in the US. So that was really helpful data for us to see. I wanted to get your thoughts, Carrie. Do you see time zone alignment as an important factor in onboarding, and how do you see that boosting productivity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, hands down, time zone alignment, I think is important for both onboarding and just a work environment in general. I think as companies start to hire more remotely, I think it's going to be critical that even if someone is based in, if you have a team in APAC and you have a team in the US, you're going to have two different onboarding times, because having the 12-hour overlap is just not going to work. And I think when we talk about all this like collaboration and you know, making sure you set the right tone in onboarding, I think going into onboarding and having your time zone aligned will show the company, or will show your new employees, how important it is for them to really put collaboration at the front of their mind. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I think that just goes a long way in helping, I think, the employee know that the business is thinking about them and their unique needs, and creating a positive experience wherever possible.
Yes. If you have a new employee start, and this is actually like when I started at Terminal, I did my my benefits overview. I did it completely alone. And I started thinking, how many different benefit overviews sessions is this person doing? And so just making sure that like you are thinking of those opportunities where you can condense, and you may have to be a little bit flexible for the onboarding time, or the first week onboarding time, if you have multiple employees in different time zones. But I do think it is critical to make sure that everyone starts together as much as possible. That's a good question. Okay, I'm being conscious of time, and I want to make sure we save some time for questions. So making the manager one-on-one count. This is something that I think is so critical in making sure that the employee has a good first week. Make sure that the hiring manager blocks off time on the new employee's first day to welcome them. It's very, very easy, especially for hiring managers who have those roles where they're back-to-back meetings, to think, I don't have time for this today, or they forgot to put it on their calendar, and all of a sudden their new hire is starting today. I know that's happened to me. Make sure that they are blocking their calendar well in advance, and make sure they're preparing an agenda. We have a sample agenda included here, but new hires want to make sure that they're going into this new job and that you're prepared to help them be successful. So always going in with an agenda is super helpful. And then, this obviously isn't as related to onboarding, but make your one-on-ones a regular occurrence. This is something I think that is very beneficial to talk about in your first one-on-one with your employee. I like to set expectations, make sure my employees know, how I feel about one-on-ones, the importance that they are to me, and give them a chance to also share how they like to be managed, how they want the one-on-ones to go. Just because your one-on-ones have gone a certain way, your employee may want to do something differently. So make sure that you're asking them for their opinion too.
Great. And then just to follow up there, are there any tips you'd include based on just your personal experience managing one-on-ones with your team? Like what's worked, what hasn't worked?
Yes. One-on-ones are my favorite meetings of the week. I love them, and I like to have a lot of fun in them. One of the things that I do is every time I have a new employee start, I share a one-on-one document with them. And the one-on-one document has 3 simple sections. There's one section that is for weekly topics. So anytime during the week that me or the employee have something that we know we need to talk about, but it's not super urgent, I add it to the list, and I know that I won't forget about it for the next one-on-one. So that's the first part. The second part is just a quick updates box with their recs or the projects that they're working on, and then a space for them to include any notes. The third part of my one-on-one worksheet is my favorite part. And it is a box to put an emoji to show how you feel for the day. Anyone who knows me knows I'm obsessed with emojis. And so on the side of the worksheet is just a bunch of emojis to pick from, ranging from happy, sad, sleepy, hungover, heads down, anything. And then before the one-on-one, the employee and I will go in and just put our emoji with however we're feeling that day. I love it. My employees usually love it. It's just a really great way for me to get a sense of how they're feeling when I go into the meeting, so that if they're grumpy or angry, I can kind of change my, not go in as this excited, today's the best day of my life, knowing that they probably have some important things to talk about. So that is, I think one-on-ones are very important, and I think it's very important to not only make sure they're consistent, during your everyday after onboarding, but during onboarding as well.
That's great. I love the emoji tip.
So fun. Okay, jumping right in, establish a remote buddy program. 20% of new hires struggle with loneliness. With remote work, that can only further exaggerate it. And I think we're probably going to start seeing that number go up as more companies switch to remote. A buddy system is an incredible way to solve this by really matching the new hire with a trusted ally who's been at the company for a while, can answer their questions, make any key introductions, and really just guide them through the ramp up process. Make sure that you set the expectations with the buddy so they know exactly what they should be covering. I would also stress that it is very important to have the buddy do just a quick check-in every morning with the new hire for the first week. It's a great way to just have the new hire have someone to look forward to every day to talk to, as well as give them an opportunity to have a place to ask questions with someone they've been building rapport with over the week, rather than having to ping random people who they don't know yet at the company. And then make sure you stress to the buddy that this is a safe space, and really it needs to be a trusted companionship. I'm sure we can all remember starting at a new company and feeling a little bit lost, not knowing who to ask for help. So really having that buddy, I think, is a huge benefit to helping the person get ramped up most effectively. Right. Check in on your new hires workspace. Making sure they have a devoted workspace is very, very important. And I think sometimes employees think if they don't have a dedicated office, switching from home to work mode can be impossible. So if they don't have a dedicated workspace, suggesting a panel room divider is something that can be incredibly beneficial and only costs about $60 on Amazon. Another thing that we like to do is offer thoughtful perks. So consider giving your new employee a coffee shop gift card to encourage them to, well, maybe in a few months, go outside the house. But I think it's very important to just make sure that you encourage them to work and get outside the house at least once in a while. And then investing in ergonomics. So what we do at Terminal that I think is very beneficial is we put together a list of recommended items for new hires, so that when they start, we send them a list that has different standing desks, monitors, chairs, anything that people at Terminal have purchased and thought it was a good decision. We like to share that with our employees to make it easier for them to get comfortable quicker. And then encourage your hires to personalize their home office. We had mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about pre-boarding, sending new hires company branded swag. Consider looking into swag that will help spice up the employee's home office and add a little bit of flair. So Post-it notes, pens, chapsticks, water bottles, those are all pretty cheap and can be bought in bulk to have for a while. All right, so once you are getting through the onboarding curriculum, you're getting to the end, you want to make sure that your program is always evolving. So if you do involve different functions as part of your onboarding plan, make sure the content they are sharing is relevant to any changes in the company. There will be functions, such as marketing, that will probably need to be updated a little bit more frequently than others. But it's very important to make sure that as your company is growing and developing, your onboarding is doing the same. And send a survey. Feedback is so important. Very similar to candidate experience surveys. We want to know how the new hires feel about the curriculum that they were learning, time they spent, and do they feel like they're walking away ready to start doing the job that they were hired for. And then finally, retention. If employees go into their new role after onboarding feeling unsupported, there's a much more likely chance that they're going to start looking for a job within their first 6 months of starting. So make sure you're always looking at the data that you're collecting and seeing if there's any sort of trends that you need to look at. You will be able to get a lot of good information, especially if you send the survey out as we do at Terminal. We do 30 days and 90 days. This gives us a chance to not only see how they transitioned at the beginning, but also 3 months down the line, is what they learned, relevant and helping them in their job today.
Awesome. All right, that was so helpful, Carrie. So I am excited to transition into a little bit of Q&A. I encourage all of you to put your burning questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in about the 10 minutes that we have left. So while people are writing their questions in, Carrie, I just had a follow up on that last slide there. What do you think is a good schedule for getting feedback and making additions to the onboarding program?
That's a very good question. So as I said before, we get the feedback at the 30-day and the 90-day mark. I think it's important to remember that even though you are consistently getting feedback for improvement, you don't necessarily have to do something with it right away. So organize your data. Like I said, pay attention to the trends that you see. I recommend putting a calendar reminder every quarter to go through the curriculum a little bit deeper and see where you can improve it. I think in addition to that point, though, you do have to make sure that if you are seeing trends in the survey feedback that cannot wait until the quarter, you have to make sure that you're getting the right information in there, because it will hurt your retention numbers a lot if you continue getting the feedback and not doing anything with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a follow-up as well from Sarah. She asked, do you get a good response rate on those surveys? So just be curious to know, Carrie, if you've seen a good response rate in the past, and maybe if there are any recommendations around how to increase that if it's not very good.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's very, very important before you wrap up onboarding, give the new hires a heads up of exactly what the cadence of the surveys is going to be. And I know I probably sound like a broken record, but I'm a very big believer that you always want to show the why. So if you just end onboarding and send them the survey, the chances of them completing it are, probably 50-50. But if you tell them the why, tell them, why is the survey important? What are you going to do with this information? How is their feedback going to impact future new hires? I think that will go a long way in increasing your response rate on the surveys.
Great. And then just to answer a question that came in here, will we get the OneonOne worksheet, the manager one-on-one? So we will be following up with our onboarding guide to all of you, which we're really excited to share. It's sort of a comprehensive piece that walks you through most of what you heard today, except for it doesn't have Carrie's great stories. You'll just have to remember those. But you can get a lot of the good tips there, and the manager one-on-one recommendations are included in that. So we'll share with everyone. Great. So another question that came in from John Paul is, for how long does a remote buddy need to support new hires?
That's a really good question. I think that will depend on how long your onboarding process is. I would say definitely a week. I know I mentioned this before. I am such a firm believer in that quick check-in every morning. I think if you do that quick check-in every day the first week, see how they're feeling that Friday. And I would kind of consider the buddy to almost transition into like a mentor type of role. So it's important that the buddy just doesn't think, okay, after the first week, I'm gone. I'd say make sure it's structured, and then based on the employee, how else can you continue that partnership, like I said, as more of a mentor? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'll share too from my experience that I've found a lot of buddies will end up becoming a friend. You
Yes.
kind of have this like shared, we're in the trenches together because we started at the same time in the company. And generally, I think that, if people have similar, things in common, that a friendship will likely occur as well.
Yeah, exactly. The worst thing when you start a new job is feeling isolated. And I think that in a remote environment, people have to realize how much more difficult it is going to be for a new hire. So setting those expectations and having like clear outlines for the buddy will go a long way.
Agreed. Another great question coming in from John Paul. Any specific advice to deal remotely with introvert candidates?
Yes, that's a good question. Kira, feel free to chime in here. When it comes to my team that I have right now, I love my team so much, but I have a very good mix of introverts and extroverts. I have some people who I know will, if I give them the chance, they will heavily, talk the entire time. Something that has really, really worked for me is first is making sure to have set questions to ask employees. Like you want to have it be a kind of a brainstorm team meeting, but having questions will help the introverts kind of guide them to answer the question. But make sure that I don't want to say calling on people, but letting them know that like you want to hear their voice. I had an employee that I spoke with who wasn't saying much at a meeting. And when I talked to her, she said, I just, didn't think anyone wanted to hear what I had to say. And so I think it's encouraging them that people do want to hear, but also sometimes you just kind of have to give them that little bit of push and say, hey, Kira, what are your thoughts? And, ask directly rather than waiting for them to chime in, because sometimes it's really hard for them to do that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that as a proclaimed introvert, I think that it really helps to have that structured opportunity to raise my voice and to have a say. So
Yeah.
providing, maybe that moment in the meeting where there are a few questions and you go round robin around the room and everyone
Exactly.
chimes in is really great. I actually, we did a AMA a while back with Darren Murph, who leads the remote team at GitHub. And he said they actually go so far as to have a randomizer, which selects people at the beginning of every meeting to share like something from their life. It's a random question that they get asked. And that's a fun idea too. Maybe it's just you kind of take the opportunity to highlight different people in different meetings.
Yes, I actually do something similar. I ask a completely unwork related question at the beginning of my team meeting. And then what I do is I go around on Zoom and I call on people based on the order they are in on my screen. And my team knows this. So they know everyone's talking. No one can talk more than others. And that is also very, very helpful in getting people to break out of their shell.
Yeah, that's great. Anything to make Zoom meetings better, right?
Yes.
They can be a
Exactly.
challenge. Well, great. So we're coming up to the end here. I think we just have one more question we can maybe tackle and then wrap up. We were asked, do you recommend any differences when onboarding senior level employees? So, different than maybe someone who's going to be more of a practitioner.
Yeah. Something we did, this is, I think, a big question for a lot of companies, and you do have to make sure to find the balance. Something we did envision that was beneficial, and this probably will open up a can that could be a whole nother webinar, to be honest. But we created a modified onboarding for leaders who joined. So it was typically VP plus, maybe senior director, but it was the same content, but more of a guided, like self-guided, with a little bit different information than what, obviously, like the company mission and values is the same, but we did modify it a little bit to just be more relevant to the person's role. So if your company is at a stage where you are consistently hiring, those leadership roles, or a group of employees who are director plus, it can be beneficial to kind of have like two different versions of onboarding, if that helped.
Yeah, that's great. Well, cool. I think we've covered most of the questions that came in. And then of course, I always like to say, Carrie and I are available to answer questions that come up as you guys think about the webinar and keep tackling these issues in your job too. But for today, I think we're going to wrap up. I just want to thank you guys for your time. As I mentioned, we'll follow up with a link to the onboarding guide, so that you all can kind of have that in your pocket as you're navigating this world. And I just wanted to give a quick promotional shout out to our next webinar as well. So this is coming up on August 25th, and we'll be talking about decoding global engineering markets. So this is very timely. I'm talking about this because just today we launched Team Finder, which is Terminal's new tool for finding talent in markets across the world. So it's not, I encourage you guys to check it out, but it's a way to kind of go in there and find the skill sets that you need for your team, and what locations and what cities those skill sets reside in. So we'll be doing a webinar tackling that as well in August, and helping you guys find the right talent for your team, and hope you can join us for that as well. But thank you, Carrie, and thank you all of you guys. This was a great session today, and I look forward to connecting again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.